SNK's Neo-Geo line of arcade systems and home consoles may typically be known for their myriad, if derivative, fighting game series, but that's not to say there aren't a decent amount of shooting games in the mix. Outside of emulation, the Neo-Geo CD is still the most affordable way to play most, but not all, of the platform shmups on original hardware by a significant margin. While scaled back from what the MVS and AES had to offer, it still features a decent roster of titles. Horizontal R-type alike such as Last Resort, or Pulstar. Popular vertical shooters like Alpha Mission 2, Ghost Pilots, and Sonic Wings. Run-and-gunners like Cyberlip, Magician Lord, and the excellent Metal Slug. And even some unique shooters like Nam 1975, Twinkle Star Sprites, and Viewpoint. There are even a small subset of homebrew titles including NCI's conversion of Andro Dunos, NG Dev Team's Last Hope, and most recently, Bitmap Bureau's Xenocrisis, complete with additions that we're pretty sure weren't in the Dreamcast version we took a look at in Series 11. Granted, there are drawbacks. The Neo-Geo CD is well known for its insanely long, sometimes frequent load times, though the vast majority of the shooting games on the platform mercifully have comparatively brief ones. After the front-end load, of course. While the MVS and AES are where most people will prefer to play their Neo-Geo games, the CD versions do have merits, especially with arranged Redbook soundtracks and, every now and again, an exclusive title, which is where we're picking up. It's the series finale of Bullet Heaven, and we're taking a look at the mythical Choutetsu Brikinger.
Choutetsu Brikinger, known in the West as Ironclad, was originally a Neo-Geo CD exclusive when it was released in 1996. A few ROMs have since been made available through services like Wii Virtual Console and Good Old Games via Windows, though they are derived from a complete MVS prototype that ended up never getting an official release on original hardware.
As such, the Neo-Geo CD version is something rather special. It's also quite rare, with complete specimens not only being very difficult to track down, but also rather pricey when they do surface. But what about the game? There isn't a ton of talk about Choutetsu Brikinger or even the releases of Ironclad on Wii VC or stuff like GOG. Could it actually be the best shooting game the Neo Geo ever saw? Let's take a closer look. Bold claims, I know, and while Choutetsu Brikinger consists of a number of different concepts from a number of different games, it does so with a number of interesting hooks that brings it all together in great ways.
Starting out, players have their choice of 3 different aircraft with varying speed, shot, and power attributes. Each player selects from a unique roster in either red for player 1 or blue for player 2. Since each player's roster consists of different planes rather than the same palette-swapped ones, players should be able to keep track of their ship much easier through the chaos many of the stages bring.
Like any other Neo Geo game, 8-way digital control lies at the heart of the player's movement. 3 action buttons are used in Ironclad, one for the player's main shots, another to deploy a screen-clearing bomber, more on that in a bit, and finally one more to deploy and recall their robo-buddy known as the Brikinger.
For being an ironclad little death ball, the Brikinger is a flexible little guy, used both for defense and offense, not unlike the Force and R-Type. Using it to defend and attack carefully and strategically will be critical in making decent progress in the game. Like R-Type, the Brikinger is also where the bulk of the player's weapons will reside.
The Brikinger can equip weapons to each of its arms. The left arm dictates what kind of range shots it fires, while its right is used for direct melee damage. Carrier ships can be shot to drop these weapons, and each type will cycle through 3 variants. For ranged, players can collect laser, homing missile, and flamethrower type arms, while melee, known as armor, will cycle through drill, saw, and hammer types.
All 6 of these pickups will behave differently whether the Brikinger is mounted to the player's aircraft or deployed autonomously. The flamethrower, for example, will create a ring of fire around the player, which is great for crowd control. But on its own, a typical stream of flame is shot from the Brikinger when minding its own business.
Depending on the armor equipped, launching the Brikinger will also result in different outcomes. Holding the fire button will charge the Brikinger up, indicated by a steadily building Brikin speech bubble. At maximum charge, the Brikinger will fly out to damage anything in its path. Drill can reach the other end of the screen very quickly. The saw blade variant covers considerably less distance but fires a wide swath of blades. Finally, Hammer is super powerful and longer lasting, but needs to be deployed as close to the target as possible.
While all of this is happening, players will also be collecting power-up icons for their actual planes. Each of the player's 3 shot levels have 3 slots which can be filled by collecting P icons. These shots are fired whenever the Brikinger is not mounted to the plane, so having a high-powered main shot is useful in spots where the Brikinger is required to be detached.
It should also be mentioned that enemies on the ground can't simply be shot by the player's normal bullets or even the Brikinger's weapons. Rather, the player's plane will fire a homing missile along with whatever weapons are in play at that time. These missiles will track and destroy ground-based stuff. The homing missile weapon also does wonders taking out terrestrial things, making it the exception to all other weapon types.
There will be times when things get just a little too insane and a screen-clearing bomber is required to recover. Pressing the C button on the Neo-Geo controller will force the Brikinger into overdrive, which clears all shots, destroys all smaller enemies, and damages bosses in a pinch. The catch is deploying this bomber will strip the Brikinger of both its right and left arms, leaving it with weak bullets when deployed and little more than an inert cannonball when launched. Additional left and right weapons will need to be collected for the bomber to be used again.
The Brikinger can also be used defensively though. It can sustain a few hits from light fire before it falls off of the player's aircraft and leaves them vulnerable. However, it can't save the player from larger, heavier attacks. Not only will the Brikinger instantly be knocked off the aircraft, the player will sustain damage. We found that invariably though, the player will likely sustain damage at some point or another. Upon impact, the player will lose power with the chance to pick it back up within a brief period of time. Thankfully, the player's base levels are maintained. In place of lives, each player has an energy gauge that consists of several segments. More are present based on the difficulty chosen, with easy sporting 5 segments and normal and above having less. Thankfully, direct collisions with inert obstacles and non-weaponized enemies won't count as a hit, something that can be abused with bosses. And blue carriers dispense energy refills when shot. Additionally, the player will recover energy between stages.
Choutetsu Brikinger features a total of 15 stages, which is quite the decent number. However, these stages are set up not unlike the Darius series, with players choosing the next stage they enter on a branching map. Unlike Darius though, Choutetsu Brikinger has variable gain length depending on the path chosen. As little as 4 stages and as many as 6 will lead the player to one of 5 possible endings. The game can even be started from one of 2 stage variants. This alone gives Choutetsu Brikinger a huge amount of replay value.
And the co-op feature extends it even further. A 2-player game really makes for an engaging, strategic time. Coordinating weapon loadouts for efficient crowd control and rear approach engagement, using fire and missiles, for example, shows that a pair of players can really fine-tune and adjust their approaches for maximum efficacy. An extra bomber versus bosses also never hurts.
All well and good, Choutetsu Brikinger is a solid game when all is said and done, and it's especially fun with a friend. It does have a fairly high degree of challenge, as most Neo-Geo shmups tend to. However, we did also find that there were a lot of situations that seemed to be either cheap, overcrowded, or just plain impossible to avoid, especially in the case of certain bosses, both stage end and final. That the player can recover life makes it seem as if a no-miss isn't really something that can actually be done without an extreme amount of skill or just plain luck. If the player dies though, they do have the option to continue using the same or a different plane. A carrier will also drop a left and right weapon as well as a full power upgrade.
Perhaps because of this, the controls and mechanics between the plane and Brikinger are maybe just a touch too overcomplicated, and the hitbox is a bit on the vague side. Sometimes we could sneak through comparatively dense bullets, while at others we couldn't get through a larger gap. Despite these minor issues, its imaginative setup, huge stage set, and unique structure on the platform makes it the most fun we've actually had with a Neo-Geo shmup. Of course, it also has other merits beyond its solid, if slightly flawed, gameplay system, but honestly no other scrolling shmup on the Neo-Geo CD comes close. Metal Slug does though, just saying. Okay.
Choutetsu Brikinger's gameplay may have its complexities, but its scoring is anything but complex. Enemy and boss destruction is where the bulk of the player's score will reside, though a number of bonus medals will often be released when killing off a mid-boss or stage-end foe.
However, these medals will also be released by enemies that are killed directly by the Brikinger. Regular run-of-the-mill enemies will drop silver medals, while bosses that sustain the killing blow from the Brikinger will drop double the medals that would normally drop, including gold ones.
Players should collect medals as quick as possible, as they will degrade over time and eventually crumble. Bronze medals are worth 500 points, silver 1,000, and gold 3,000. Additionally, collecting energy pickups and power drops beyond maximum will reward the player with bonus points.
Finally, while Choutetsu Brikinger allows the player to continue indefinitely while maintaining their score, 1 point is added to the score when it occurs, allowing players and spectators to see at a glance how many times the player has continued. It's all fairly simple, but it would have made for a decent way to climb the arcade leaderboards had it made it to actual arcades. With its amalgamation of R-Type and Darius-style gameplay and progression, it should come as no real surprise that more similarities to other games can be found in Choutetsu Brikinger's presentation. But this time it seems as if this is the game that would inspire others down the line. At a glance, Choutetsu Brikinger has a similar vantage point to a game like Cave's Pro Gear or Akai Katana, but it predates the earliest of them by 5 years. Sure, others had an angled view similar to it, such as Magmax or Saycross from Nichibutsu, heck, even Philosoma, but they all either had simple visuals, pure horizontal vantage points, vertical or isometric scrolling, a bunch of different camera angles, whatever the case may be. None of them were horizontal shooters with a purely angled overhead view that featured both terrestrial and airborne enemies that could appear anywhere on the screen. It just didn't really happen. Choutetsu Brikinger definitely seems to be where this all started.
Featuring heavily pre-rendered visuals, in general they maybe haven't aged especially well, but they are pretty good nonetheless. Regardless of the stage, the graphics here really shine on older TV sets, especially those that use composite inputs. Everything has plenty of animation to it, and some of the backgrounds, especially the high-altitude ones, are just incredible. Each stage is also broken into distinct phases, each with its own distinct visual style. It's pretty fantastic.
The general design behind the 6 aircraft split between player 1 and 2, the enemies and set pieces, the Brikinger, the weapons, everything really is well designed and sticks out even among the rest of the Neo-Geo shooting games, and could perhaps be the most unique of them all. Yes, even compared to Pulsar and the AES and MVS's Blazing Star, they're just super derivative of R-Type, let's be honest. Choutetsu Brikinger's bosses especially are also pretty memorable despite some being reused in some stages. Our favorites? A literal Colosseum fight, a pipe organ mecha, and of course, this amazing chicken boss.
Choutetsu Brikinger's sound is also on the higher end of things, with its great music giving each stage and boss fight the right kind of feel and tension for what's happening on screen. Though some tracks may not be to everyone's taste, we like what's here quite a bit.
Meanwhile, the sound effects used here are also pretty great. Not many are especially irritating, save for the laser weapon and maybe the low life alarm, but it admittedly does a good job of getting the player's attention when they're on the verge of death. But there's also a couple of effects that made us raise an eyebrow, specifically these clear lightsaber effects, and even an effect that sounds remarkably like Lavos from Chrono Trigger.
There's also a neat story behind the whole game, which, as mentioned before, culminates with one of 5 different endings depending on the paths chosen. Of course, in our case everything is almost entirely in Japanese due to using a Japanese system. But the beauty of the Neo-Geo CD is that, just as with the MVS and AES, if you put this Japanese-only release into a North American Neo-Geo CD, it will display entirely in English, complete with the English Ironclad title screen.
Rounding out the presentation is a cool attract sequence, a really cool high score screen that shows not just the score in the aircraft used, but also the path routed through, and easy to read menus and user interfaces. Very cool stuff.
So, how does Choutetsu Brikinger stack up? Let's take a look.
Choutetsu Brikinger's control is more than adequate. Movement is sharp and responsive, which is a big plus.
It has the right kind of arcade complexity where it counts, but deploying and recalling the Brikinger can often be sluggish and overcomplicated in situations that require precision, defense, or a speedy escape.
As a Neo-Geo title, you knew this was going to be a pretty tough game.
As a home exclusive, it's somewhat manageable but often sports an intense, unforgiving difficulty even on easy.
Choutetsu Brikinger has a great branching progression akin to Darius that sports 5 different endings depending on the paths chosen.
Lots to play for one player or two, and getting good will absolutely take time.
Perhaps the best looking shooter on the Neo-Geo CD that isn't called Pulsar or Metal Slug. Especially in its backgrounds, Choutetsu Brikinger has some great design behind its player ships, stages, and enemies, despite pre-rendered visuals that have aged somewhat poorly.
At the very least, it's a game that is instantly recognizable for those that know and eyebrow-raising for those unaware.
Featuring a soundtrack unlike any other with some great sound effects throughout, Choutetsu Brikinger has great audio design.
But it also has some interesting effect choices. We hear lightsabers and even lavos up in here.
Borrowing a vast amount of elements and mechanics from a wide variety of shooters of its time, from R-Type to Darius and more, Choutetsu Brikinger blends all of its elements into a game that covers a huge number of bases in a pretty classy way.
Its angled horizontal perspective would seemingly also inspire caving games such as Pro-Gear and Akai Katana, and in turn, modern Yokos such as Battle Traverse and Rolling Gunner.
There's no way around it if you want a real copy of this game on Neo-Geo CD. Choutetsu Brikinger sports one of the most extreme costs there is at auction, giving it an impossible cost to value. It's definitely fun, but not thousands of dollars fun, come on. Alternative methods should definitely be explored if the Neo-Geo CD version is what you want to play.
Thankfully, other versions such as the Windows conversion of the AES prototype can also be had for next to nothing, though its audio lacks a lot of the quality its official CD release featured.
Polestar, Blazing Star, Sonic Wings, Twinkle Star sprites, there are a lot of great shooters across all Neo Geo systems, but we're gonna go out on a limb here and say it, Choutetsu Brikinger is better than all of them. It's so much more memorable, offers so much more to play, and has better hooks to its gameplay than any other shooting game on Neo Geo by a country mile. Don't get me wrong, games like Polestar, Blazing Star, and Metal Slug are super duper good, but they're way too much like other games. Well, except Metal Slug. Metal Slug does everything right. But this though, Saurus may have borrowed a couple of elements here or there, but it sets itself far enough apart from its inspirations while also setting the stage for some amazing stuff later down the line. It's more interesting to us than any other shooter ever released on the Neo Geo, and we highly recommend it. For the purists among us, Choutetsu Brikinger can be had at auction for obscene, irresponsible amounts of cash. For the rest of us, the GOG PC version is a great concession. Alternate methods are also recommended if the CD version's better sound is important to you. Hey, let's talk about that Astro City Mini V.